Initial configuration. Initial configuration. In this module, you will learn about administrative controls, initial access to the system, configuration management, licensing and software updates, account administration, and viewing and filtering logs. Administrative controls. There are 4 firewall management access methods. Administrators often configure and monitor the firewall through the web-based Web UI. This graphical interface provides detailed administrative and reporting tools in an intuitive, browser-based format. The Palo Alto Networks firewall can be configured and managed centrally using the Panorama Management Server, the Palo Alto Networks Centralized Security Management System. If you have multiple firewalls deployed in your network, use Panorama to manage configurations, policies, and software and dynamic content updates. Panorama also will aggregate data from all managed firewalls and give you visibility into the information about all the traffic on your network. The PAN-OS CLI enables you to access the firewall, display status and configuration information, and modify the configuration. Access to the PAN-OS CLI is provided through SSH, Telnet, or direct serial console access. External systems and applications can remotely execute commands on a Palo Alto Networks firewall using the REST-based XML API. For example, you can use the REST-based interface to access operational status, reports, and packet captures, or to configure the firewall. The PAN-OS XML API also can be used to capture login events and send them to the firewall. The XML API is implemented using HTTP, HTTPS requests and responses. Palo Alto Networks also provides an API browser on the firewall at firewall/API, where firewall is the host name or IP address of the firewall. PAN-OS 8.0 XML API reference documentation is available at www.paloaltonetworks.com/documentation. Information about XML API integration is available on live.paloaltonetworks.com. The PAN-OS Web UI provides a common management interface across all Palo Alto Networks hardware-based and virtual-based firewall models. The Web UI is supported on Internet Explorer 7+, Firefox 3.6+, Safari 5+, and Chrome 11+. The management tools are grouped according to functional categories. These categories are listed as tabs at the top of the interface to allow ease in switching between administrative tasks. The Help button opens an HTML formatted version of an administrator's guide in a separate browser tab. Click this searchable manual to get information about the options shown in a window or panel. The Tasks button at the bottom right of the browser provides a list of running and completed tasks for this firewall. This button is especially useful for verifying that configuration changes have been completed. The web interface defaults to US English, but can be set to Chinese, Simplified Chinese, French, Japanese, or Spanish. The Web UI provides guidance throughout the configuration of the firewall. Red underlines indicate tabs containing information that must be completed. Yellow highlights indicate required fields. The OK button is unavailable if required information is missing or is invalid. Initial access to the system. Palo Alto Networks firewalls are built with a dedicated out-of-band network management interface labeled MGT. This interface passes only management traffic for the firewall and cannot be configured as a standard traffic interface. This interface is used for direct connectivity to the management plane of the firewall. You can configure the firewall to allow management traffic over the normal in-band traffic interfaces. For most models of firewalls, the MGT port has a factory default IP address of 192.168.1.1. For VM series firewalls starting with PAN-OS version 8.0, the MGT port is configured as a DHCP client. You can also configure the MGT port of any firewall model to use DHCP. You accomplish initial configuration of the firewall by connecting to the MGT port or to the serial console port on the firewall. The serial console port is an RJ45 connection on all firewalls. The serial console port has default configuration values of 9600 8N1. The factory default for each firewall is to have a single administrative account named admin with a password of admin. A warning message appears at login in the web UI and the CLI until the default password is changed. The local admin password is stored in the firewall's XML configuration file, but is encrypted using the firewall's master key. You can reset a firewall to its factory default settings. If you know the admin account password, you can use the CLI command request system private data reset. If you do not know the admin account password, you must first place the firewall in maintenance mode. To enter maintenance mode, reboot the firewall. As the firewall is booting up, type the command maint into the CLI through the console port. After some time, you can choose the option to have the firewall reset to default, including the default admin password. You can also configure the MGT interface using the web UI. To connect your system or laptop to the MGT port so that you can use the web UI, complete the following steps. Configure your system or laptop Ethernet interface in the 192.168.1.0/24 subnet. Connect to the MGT port with an Ethernet cable. Launch a web browser connection to https://192.168.1.1. Log in using the default firewall username and password. Select Device, Setup, Interfaces. Click Management. In the window that opens, configure the network settings for the MGT interface. Reconnect to the web UI using the new network configuration. HTTPS, SSH, and ping are enabled by default. HTTPS is required to access and manage the firewall through the MGT interface using the web UI. SSH is required to enable CLI connection to the MGT interface. Palo Alto Networks recommends that you enable ping to check connectivity to the MGT interface or to support heartbeats between firewalls deployed as a pair for high availability. By default, HTTP, SNMP, and Telnet are disabled on the MGT interface. You can configure these settings as appropriate for your environment. For additional security, enter IP addresses to the Permitted IP Addresses field to restrict administrative access to just those IP addresses. A firewall hostname can be a maximum of 31 characters in length and contain a mix of alphanumeric, hyphen, and underscore characters. The factory default hostname is the firewall model name. The domain name can be a maximum of 31 characters in length and contain a mix of alphanumeric, hyphen, and dot characters. The factory default domain is empty. If the MGT interface is configured by DHCP, then the Accept DHCP Server Provided Hostname option becomes available. Likewise, the Accept DHCP Server Provided Domain option becomes available. Select these options to configure the firewall to allow hostname and domain name configuration by DHCP. The host name is labeled as device name in reports and logs. For example, for custom reports, you can request that the report contain the device name. You also can filter log entries by device name. A login banner is optional text that you can add to the login page so that administrators will see information they must know before they log in. For example, you can add a message to notify users of restrictions on unauthorized use of the firewall. The firewall can provide various services that include a web server for the Web UI interface and a Global Protect portal or gateway. Communication between these services running on the firewall and their clients can be secured by SSL TLS. When SSL TLS is used, the firewall requires a digital certificate that is trusted by the clients. The clients and the firewall also must negotiate the protocol SSL TLS versions to use for communication. An SSL TLS service profile is configured to specify the firewall certificate and the acceptable protocol versions that can be used by the clients when connecting to the firewall services. The information that you provide in the latitude and longitude fields enables the geographic placement of the firewall on the ACC tab's Source Regions and Destination Regions maps. If you are configuring the MGT interface using the Web UI, assign DNS servers for the MGT interface. You can also configure NTP servers for the firewall. If the MGT interface is configured by DHCP, the DNS and NTP server addresses can be assigned by DHCP. You can also configure the domain name of the update server used by the firewall to download updated software and threat database updates. The default entry is updates.paloaltonetworks.com. If the Verify Update Server Identity option is selected, the firewall verifies the SSL certificate of the update server from which the software or threat database update is downloaded. This option adds a level of security for the communication between the firewall and the update server. By default, the firewall uses the MGT interface to access remote DNS services, content update services, license retrieval services, NTP services, or other external services. If you do not want to enable external network access to your management network, you must set up an in-band data port to provide access to required external services and set up service routes to instruct the firewall which ports to use to access the external services. Use Device, Setup, Services, Service Route Configuration to configure service routes. Select the checkbox next to any external services that the firewall will access through an in-band port, and then click Set Selected Service Routes. In the dialog window that opens, select the source interface and the source address. After you commit the configuration, the firewall will use the in-band port to access those external services. Configuration management. The running configuration is the actual configuration controlling the operation of the firewall. It is maintained in a file on the firewall named running-config.xml. The running configuration is copied to a candidate configuration during firewall startup. In-progress edits are made to the candidate configuration. When you click Commit at the top of the web UI or type Commit in the CLI, the candidate configuration overwrites the current running configuration, which activates all configuration changes. The firewall saves previous running configurations and labels these configurations by date and timestamps. The web UI includes a set of operations that are used to manage the running and candidate configurations. For example, you can use the web UI to switch to a previously running configuration. You can manage running, candidate, and saved configurations from the Device, Setup, Operations page. These operations are global in scope. All changes from any administrator will be loaded, saved, reverted, and so on. The revert, save, and load operations all work with firewall configurations that are local to the firewall. The export operations transfer configurations as XML formatted files from the firewall to the host running the web UI browser. From your local machine, you can save the files as configuration backups. Exported files also can be edited, which means that you could configure a firewall for your environment, export its configuration as an XML file, and then use slightly edited versions of the file as configuration templates for other firewalls. However, be aware that the Panorama appliance makes building and distributing template configurations easier than manually exporting, copying, editing, and importing XML files. The import operations transfer XML configuration files from the host running the web UI browser to the firewall. From there, the XML file can be loaded as the candidate configuration, or even committed to become the running configuration. If you load or revert to a configuration from this page and then commit, only a full commit is possible. A full commit writes all changes by all administrators to the running configuration. At boot time, the latest configuration on disk is loaded to the candidate configuration in control plane memory. An auto-commit copies the candidate configuration to the running configuration in control plane memory. The running configuration in control plane memory is then pushed to data plane memory, where it is used to inspect and control traffic traversing the firewall. Administrators make changes to the candidate configuration. A commit operation writes the changes to the running configuration in control plane and data plane memory. The firewall creates a date and time-stamped version of the running configuration whenever you perform a commit. To restore a previous version of a running configuration, click Load Configuration Version. You can save a candidate configuration in several ways. Click Save Candidate Configuration to save the configuration to memory. If you were to continue editing and clicked Save Candidate Configuration again, the configuration saved in memory would be overwritten. This saved configuration is in volatile memory and will not survive if you reboot the firewall. If you were editing and wanted to abort the changes since the last save, click Revert to Last Saved Configuration. Rather than always save your changes to memory, you can opt to save your current candidate configuration to an XML file name on disk by clicking Save Named Configuration Snapshot. This saved configuration would survive a firewall reboot. You can have multiple named configurations saved on your firewall. You can click Load Named Configuration Snapshot to replace the current candidate configuration with the named configuration in an XML file. If you want to delete your current candidate configuration and start over, you can copy the running configuration to the candidate configuration by clicking Revert to Running Configuration. Admin Level Commit is available starting with PAN-OS version 8.0. It enables each administrator to commit only their changes to the running configuration. Admin Level Commit simplifies your configuration workflow because you do not have to coordinate commits with other administrators or be concerned about changes that other administrators have made but are not ready to have committed. In versions prior to 8.0, a commit operation committed all changes made by all administrators. In the example, Commit All Changes is selected, which commits all changes made by all administrators. You must have the necessary privileges to perform this type of commit. You can commit just your changes or the changes of a select group of other administrators. In the top example, only the changes made by the admin user would be committed. However, if you click the admin user name, the web UI offers the choice to select additional administrators. In the lower example, the zone admin user was selected in addition to the admin user. As a result of this selection, changes from both the admin and the zone admin users would be committed to the running configuration. In every version of PAN-OS software, changes made to the current candidate configuration could be saved to a default XML file on the firewall. This capability enables you to save your current progress and continue your work later without having to commit a partially completed configuration change. Saved changes made by any administrator are written to the same default XML file. Starting with PAN-OS version 8.0, you can save just your changes or the changes of a select group of other administrators to the default XML file. Each change is tagged with information about the administrator that made the change. In every version of PAN-OS software, you can revert to the last saved configuration in the default XML file on the firewall's disk. This capability enables you, for example, to change your mind and remove your most recent changes made since the last time you saved your candidate configuration. Starting with PAN-OS version 8.0, you can revert to just your last saved configuration or revert to the last saved configuration of a select group of other administrators. The Preview Changes link opens a window that displays a side-by-side comparison of the running and candidate configurations before you commit. Differences in the configurations are color-coded to indicate which information has been added, deleted, or modified. The Change Summary link lists the individual changes for which you are committing changes. For each object, it lists the object's name, whether it is a shared object or for a specific virtual system, whether it is an edit, create, or delete operation, and the name of the administrator performing the commit. The Validate Commit link performs a syntactic validation and semantic validation of a firewall candidate configuration before committing it. A semantic validation determines whether the configuration is complete and makes sense. Such validation substantially reduces the number of failures at commit time. The results display all of the warnings and errors of a full commit. Warnings do not prevent a commit, but errors do. Warnings include rule shadowing and application dependency warnings. Errors include an invalid root destination or a missing account and password that are required to query a server. Starting with PanOS 8.0, the Preview Changes and Validate Commit links can display all changes by all administrators or just those changes associated with selected administrators. In the example, the Preview Changes window shows only the changes made to the candidate configuration by the admin user. The web UI supports multiple administrators. An administrator can choose to take either a commit lock that prevents commit operations by another administrator or a config lock that prevents changes to the candidate configuration. Beginning with PanOS version 8.0, you can use admin-level commits rather than take locks. If you want administrators to automatically acquire a commit lock when they log in, go to Device, Setup, Management, General Settings to configure the behavior. To take a lock, display locks, or remove a lock, first open the Locks window. The Locks window displays any open locks and provides choices to take or remove locks. Locks can be removed by the administrator who created them or by an administrator with super user privileges. Commit and config locks are released automatically when a commit operation is completed. Now we'll move to licensing and software updates. Before you can start using your firewall to secure the traffic on your network, you must register your firewall with Palo Alto Networks, activate your support license, and then activate the licenses for each of the subscriptions that you purchased. Before you can retrieve a license, the firewall must be configured with an IP address, netmask, default gateway, and DNS server IP address. To register a hardware firewall, click Assets on the Palo Alto Networks support page, enter your serial number, and click Register New Device. The support page can be found at support.paloaltonetworks.com. When you purchase a VM series firewall, you receive a set of authorization codes by email. The email typically includes authorization code or codes to license the VM series model that was purchased. To use the authorization code, register the code to the support account on the Palo Alto Networks support portal. If you have an existing support account, access the VM Series authentication code link on the support portal to manage the VM Series firewall licenses and download the software. If you do not have an existing support account, use the auth code to register and create an account on the support portal. After the new account is verified and the registration is complete, you can log in and download the software package that is needed to install the VM Series firewall. After you purchase your subscriptions, you should have received an email from Palo Alto Networks customer service listing the activation code associated with each subscription. Before you can activate these licenses, you must activate your support license. Click Device, Support, and then click Activate Support using authorization code. With support activated, click Device, Licenses to activate your other subscriptions. There are multiple methods to activate your subscriptions. For guidance, see the PanOS Administrator's Guide at www.paloaltonetworks.com/documentation. Activation of a Wildfire license requires a commit. The firewall requires updates to the software and threat databases to maintain the most current protection levels. The MGT interface can be used to acquire these updates, or an in-band traffic interface can be configured to acquire these updates. The firewall requires DNS server configuration to connect to the update servers. To upgrade to a new release of the PanOS software, click Check Now to display the latest versions of the PanOS software available from Palo Alto Networks. Read the release notes for each version. Then select the version to download and install. A support license is required for the download. Software updates require a firewall reboot. When you upgrade, you typically must download the X.0 base release before you install the maintenance or feature release. For example, to upgrade from 6.1.9 to 7.0.1, download both 7.0.0 and 7.0.1. When you install 7.0.1, the 7.0 software is automatically installed. Software can be downloaded directly from the Palo Alto Networks update server, or the software can be downloaded to another system such as a user desktop or a panorama management server, and then uploaded to the firewall. When you manually upload a software image to the Palo Alto Networks firewall, the image appears in the list of available software at Device, Software. Click Install just as you would with software that is downloaded from the update server. Before you upgrade the firewall software, the firewall must be running the most recent version of the Applications and Threats updates. Without the current update, the software installation process fails, and a prompt indicates that an update to the Applications and Threats file is required. Palo Alto Networks regularly updates its threats and application databases. Updates include new antivirus and spyware definitions, new malicious domains and URLs, and new application signatures. This new information must be downloaded to the firewall to maintain the most current protections. Before you can download Applications and Threats updates, you must have a threat prevention license. To fully protect your environment, you should also purchase and activate the separate antivirus and wildfire licenses. You can download updates directly from the Palo Alto Networks update server. You can also download the updates to another system, such as a user desktop or a panorama management server, and then upload them to the firewall. Whether you download an update or upload an update from another system to the firewall, the update appears in the list of available updates at Device, Dynamic Updates. Click Install to install the update. Updated content is made available by Palo Alto Networks on the following schedule. Antivirus is daily. Applications and Threats are weekly. Wildfire is approximately every 5 minutes. You configure how frequently the firewall checks for available updates. The firewall can check for antivirus updates as frequently as every hour, for Applications and Threats updates as frequently as every 30 minutes, and for wildfire updates as frequently as every minute. Find additional information in the Tips for Managing Content Updates white paper on the knowledge base at live.paloaltonetworks.com/docs/doc-1578. Account administration. By default, only the predefined admin account has access to the firewall. However, you can add administrator accounts to the firewall for delegation and auditing purposes. When you create additional administrator accounts, each can have its own set of administrative privileges. Specify administrative privileges by creating one or more admin role profiles with specific sets of privileges, and then assign an admin role profile to each administrator account. PAN-OS software provides flexibility when administrator accounts and admin roles are created. You can create and manage accounts and admin roles locally on the firewall, or incorporate a supported authentication, authorization, and accounting service. PAN-OS software supports remote user accounts in Active Directory, LDAP, Radius, TACACS Plus, and Kerberos. PAN-OS software supports remote role assignments in Radius or TACACS Plus using vendor-specific attributes, or VSAs. No matter which user makes changes to the running configuration, all changes are logged in the firewall's configuration and system logs. The system log records when an administrator logs in, and the configuration log records any changes that they make. You can use these logs to determine who made changes and when they made them. To create a local administrator account, create an admin role profile. Create a local administrator account. To create a non-local administrator account, create an admin role profile, create a server profile, create an authentication profile. Optionally create an authentication sequence, and create a non-local administrator account. There are two types of admin role profiles: predefined dynamic profiles and administrator-defined role-based profiles. There are 6 dynamic profiles with predefined privileges labeled Super User, Super User Read-Only, Device Administrator, Device Administrator Read-Only, and if your firewall is capable of virtual systems, Virtual System Administrator and Virtual System Administrator Read-Only. These are dynamic profiles because they are automatically updated when new capabilities are added to the PAN-OS software. The primary differences, aside from some rules being read-only, are that a device administrator cannot manage administrator accounts or create new virtual systems, and a virtual system administrator can manage only virtual systems assigned to them. Use the Admin Roles page to define role-based profiles that specify sets of custom privileges that you assign to administrative user accounts on the firewall. You define 3 types of privileges in a role-based profile: Web UI, XML API, and CLI. These 3 types of permissions are represented by 3 tabs in the Web UI, which you use to assign very granular privileges to a role-based profile. Role-based CLI privileges on the CLI tab are predefined. No customization is possible. The privileges are None, no access granted to the CLI; Super User, all access to all options of the firewall; Super Reader, read-only access to all options of the firewall; Device Admin, same as Super User except for no creation of administrative accounts; and Device Reader, same as Device Admin except for read-only. Use the Web UI to create an administrator account that is local to the firewall. The privileges of the administrator account are determined by the role profile assigned to the account. The Web UI assumes a local account and prompts for a password when you do not select an authentication profile. In this example, a dynamic profile is selected, which means that user rights are defined using one of the predefined roles. These roles affect the Web UI and the CLI. The following is a brief description of the predefined roles. Super User, all access to all options of the firewall. Super User read-only, read-only access to all options of the firewall. Device Administrator, full access to the firewall except for creation of virtual systems and administrative accounts. Device Administrator read-only, read-only access to the firewall except for viewing other administrative accounts. To ensure that locally stored passwords are strong passwords and are reset on a periodic basis, PAN-OS software enables you to set global minimum password complexity requirements and password aging values at Device, Setup, Management, Minimum Password Complexity. By default, there are no minimum requirements and password aging is not enabled. Those administrator accounts whose passwords might require more frequent resets to meet organizational or legal requirements can be assigned a password profile. A password profile specifies password aging values that override the global password aging values. Configure password profiles at Device, Password Profiles. You also may use the Web UI to create administrator accounts whose passwords are maintained in a supported external service. For example, the account password might be maintained in Active Directory. To indicate that the account password is maintained in a supported external service, create an authentication profile that connects to an external service, and then specify that authentication profile when creating an administrator account. Non-local account passwords must be authenticated through their external service. Before you can access an external service, you must create the appropriate profiles on the firewall. An authentication profile contains the information necessary to authenticate an administrator's account with an external service after one of the service's servers has been located. An authentication profile uses a server profile to locate an external service's servers. You configure a server profile with a list of an external service's servers. A firewall can consult multiple external services to authenticate an account. You specify an ordered list of authentication profiles by creating an authentication sequence on the firewall. The flowchart shown illustrates how a firewall authenticates a non-local account. If the administrator account specifies an authentication profile, then the firewall attempts to authenticate the account using the specified external service. The authentication profile specifies a server profile with a list of servers for the external service. The firewall connects to the external service and looks for the account information. If the account information is found, authentication can either succeed or fail. If the account is not found and an authentication sequence is defined, the firewall attempts to authenticate the account using the next listed authentication profile. This process continues until the account is found or no more external services are listed in the authentication sequence. Server profiles define connections that the firewall can make to external servers of specific types. For authentication purposes, specify Radius, TACACS Plus, LDAP, Kerberos, or SAML servers. Authentication profiles require server profiles to validate login information for administrator accounts that are not created on the firewall. An authentication profile specifies which authentication server and settings are used to authenticate an administrator account. You specify an authentication profile when you create an administrator account where the account name and password are maintained on an external service. An authentication profile Server profiles define connections that the firewall can make to external servers. An authentication profile Viewing and filtering logs.
Who am I? Panji. You could get down Panji. The Panji. Aha, some jour par